What is instance fleet in AWS? What is instance fleet? Instance fleet in AWS. If you have taken AWS training or are working with AWS, I am pretty much sure you have come across this. And in the interview, they are trying to understand your knowledge in AWS. So what is instance fleet? Let us try to understand it. Instance fleet contains configuration using which you can launch a group of EC2 instance. But the specialty of instance fleet here is this can be a mixed set of EC2 instance. Yes. Now you might have heard about auto scaling group, right? And we can spin up, let's say, T2 micro. But what if I want to mix T2 micro with T3 medium or M series, etc.? That is what is instance fleet. A fleet, you can imagine this also as a military fleet or a naval destroyer ship. It's not just one ship, right? It has certain small ships also that supports it. It's a fleet. Similar way, in AWS, a fleet gives you an option to mix and match different kinds of EC2 instances. Not only that, it also gives you different purchasing option. You can mix and match spot instances with reserved instances and on-demand instances. So your fleet can not just contain different kinds of machine, it can contain different pricing models also. With respect to EC2, we call it fleet, and when it can call it as instance fleet. The major use case of this fleet or instance fleet comes when you want to mix and match your EC2 instances based on the application need. Define separate on-demand and spot capacity targets. You can also do that based on how you want to mix it, just based on pricing model. And you can also specify different machine types like I mentioned. So how would you answer this question in the interview? Instance fleet is nothing but a combination of different kinds of EC2 instances, both with respect to the capacity and pricing model. This mix and match helps us in certain use cases of application development, wherein we can use the same kind of machine types with capacity but different family and mix our spot instances, reserved instances, and on-demand instances in the same group. A typical use case of this can be in AWS EMR, which is a big data processing tool in AWS, where you can process different data. And here we can mix and match the machine types and cost in the instance fleet. This is about instance fleet. That's it for this particular video. Let's meet in the next video and continue our journey preparing for DevOps interview. Thank you. What is vertical scaling and what is horizontal scaling? Explain with use case you have seen. I would like to stress a single point here that they are asking you to explain a use case that we have seen, meaning you have to share an experience if you have implemented or used either vertical scaling and horizontal scaling. So, my students, tell me, have you used vertical scaling and horizontal scaling before? I am pretty much sure you have used it either knowingly or unknowingly. Anyway, you can pause the video if you wish to think about the answer. But let me go ahead and explain what is vertical scaling and horizontal scaling, and then how to answer this question in the interview. Here is a best representation that I can come up with for explaining vertical scaling and horizontal scaling. By seeing this representation, I believe you already have understood what is this, but let me go ahead and explain this once more. If you have a server that is an EC2 instance, let's say in cloud, and it is of X large of capacity, meaning the CPU and memory are of certain capacity. If you increase this machine type to 2x, which is doubling its capacity in terms of memory, CPU, and RAM, then it is called as vertical scaling. You are moving upwards. It has its own limitation per se. Now, speaking about horizontal scaling, you have the same machine type as you can see, but you are adding more machine to handle the load. This is called as horizontal scaling. What is the best example for horizontal scaling? Auto scaling group or replication that we are aware in Kubernetes. What are the use cases of them? Well, in terms of vertical scaling, we will only implement this if we feel that our application requires more CPU and memory. In other words, if we intend to use a lot of threadings or multiprocessing capacity of the machine, we have to increase the capacity. This is vertical scaling. Example, let us say you have an application. It is doing certain tasks. And in future, you add more features to this application, then you will have to do vertical scaling to compensate the running capacity of your application, meaning your application should not become slow. Well, horizontal scaling is more about handling the traffic. You have more and more traffic coming in, but the features of the application is the same. Let me repeat it. The features of the application is the same, but the incoming traffic is more. In this case, horizontal scaling makes complete sense to implement. Let me give an example in terms of an application itself. You are building a shopping website. That is an application. If you have a basic feature, that is, there is only one product and you sell that product. In this case, if many people visit your application shopping website, then you will do horizontal scaling. For the same shopping application, let us say you implement more products. Let us say you implement payment methodology, payment gateway, real-time streaming of videos of how that product looks, etc. Your application needs more processing capacity. Then you will do vertical scaling, also included with horizontal scaling. So how can we answer this in the interview? Vertical scaling and horizontal scaling are both are important methodologies that we implement when we want to scale our application. The use case of vertical scaling will appear when we add more features to our application and the application needs more CPU memory for processing our request, wherein we need a horizontal scaling in terms of scaling our application by adding more machine types. This is mostly to handle incoming traffic, meaning we might get a sudden burst of traffic and we might want to process all of this traffic of users at the same time. We should not make our application slow. Then we use horizontal scaling. I hope it makes sense. Now let us go to our next question in the interview segment. Could you explain how you would block an IAM user from accessing a specific S3 bucket? Please read the question carefully and see what they are asking you. They are not asking you to block the user's access to S3 bucket. No, they have clearly mentioned that you have to block access to a specific S3 bucket. How will you do that? Let's see the right answer for this. If you are wondering, I will do this with IAM policy, it's wrong. It is very difficult to manage bucket level policies just by using IAM policies. It is going to be a lot of problem for you. Then what is the solution for this? In the S3 bucket, there is a section called as permissions, where you will find an option called as bucket policies. And in this bucket policy, you can mention the ARN, that is the IAM user ARN, and you can mention the permission this ARN has, that is an IAM user has. If you put this user under blocked, then this particular user, that is the IAM user, will not be able to access this S3 bucket. So don't go into the interview and tell that I will be able to do this using IAM policies. No, it is very difficult and it is not suggested. This is why we have a specific S3 bucket policy that can achieve this result for you. I would like to also show this in practice, how it looks for you in the AWS console. So to do this particular to see this particular option, you can check the AWS, you can log into the AWS account, and I have logged in here and I have an S3 bucket and I am in the permission section. Now kindly note, please don't confuse the bucket policies to block public access. This is there for a different reason. This is to block public access from outside, from the internet, okay? From the Internet of Things, that is from other users. It is trying to block the traffic. If you want to block a particular IAM user, in that case, I would suggest that you mention it as bucket policy, and you can click on this edit option, and you will see that you can mention a statement, just like an IAM policy. You can mention a policy here. You can say that allow, in this case, you can make a deny, and then action, and then you can say the resource. Here you can mention the IAM permission, etc., and you can fix it. Now, I'm not writing this policy completely, so it is giving an error. That's fine. But I wanted to show you where to make these changes as part of this question. Okay, so how do you answer this question in the interview then? You can say that to achieve this IAM related resolution, that is, I've been asked to make this change, I would start by making sure that I will be able to make the changes on that bucket myself. That is, I have the permission to make those changes in the bucket policy. And then I would basically apply the changes in the S3 bucket policy section. This is how you can answer this question in the interview. I hope it is clear. That is it for this particular video. Speak to you in the next video. Thank you. Explain the below IAM policy. Policy is on the right side. And the policy is quite big. And they might just ask you to, explain this policy in an interview. It can happen. And I'm getting this policy directly from the AWS documentation. So it is a correct policy, needless to say. So they might generally ask you, please explain this policy. You should be having the knowledge on how to explain such policies in a proper way. Now, these might not be, really used in an organization, but the point here is, do you know how to read any kind of policies? That's the question. Are you aware of how to read a policy? Okay, you can pause the video here to see how you would answer it. Let me go ahead and explain this policy first and how to answer that in the interview. To begin with, this is version, this is locked. This will not changed, okay? The next is, we have 3 set policies, that is the actions, this is a name, allow S3 list read, allow S3 self, and deny S3. Then there is effect, meaning what kind of action can you perform, the high level action. So we have two allow actions and one deny action here. And in the allow also, we are specifying specific actions that can be performed. And the resource here is all resources, that is all buckets in S3. In this particular example, so this is number one, okay? So in number two, that is this one, here we have an allow. Action is, again, everything is allowed here, it's no problem. In this case, you can see action is allowed, but there are some limited actions that we can perform. Effect is allowed, but there is limited actions we can perform. Whereas in this example that I'm showing you, we have effect allow and action ST, that is all actions are allowed, but we are locking the resources, meaning there is a resource and we are only allowing this S3 bucket access. Okay, this is the second one. The third one is deny. This is also an explicit deny, and the action is all S3 actions are denied on any bucket that has a suffix log. This is third one. So we have seen different kinds of permissions that plays a role in IAM policy. And it is important as a DevOps engineer who understands AWS cloud to read this policy and understand what kind of policy is in place. Because it is very often that you might encounter applications having issues with the IAM policies or S3 bucket policies. And if you cannot read a policy, then it will become difficult to debug any kinds of access related issues in your cloud. Okay, so how would you answer this in the interview? You can say that this particular policy has basically three major high-level actions, that is two allow and one deny. And there is one particular action that is in the first section where we are explicitly mentioning what actions are allowed, and resources all the S3 buckets. In the second one, we are allowing all kind of actions, but we are locking it to a particular S3 bucket. And the third one, we are denying all kind of actions for any buckets with a suffix log in it. So that is it for this video. I hope you understood the questions, also the gist of it, and how to answer this question if it is asked in the interview. Thank you, and speak to you in the next video. What kind of DBs, that is databases, have you used / supported? So here they are interested to, of course, know if you have worked with certain kind of databases or support certain kind of databases. So how would you tackle this particular question? It might look like a generic and a very basic question, but there is a lot hidden behind how you will answer this question in the interview. Well, you can pause this video here and try to see how you would answer it. Let me now go ahead and present a bit of information about database and then how to answer this particular question in the interview. So databases are commonly used in all different kinds of application. And as a DevOps engineer, you will definitely come across database, especially if you are supporting any kind of developer team or application development. Being a DevOps engineer, you don't need to be a database expert. That is not expected out of you. But having a clear information on what kind of databases have you encountered, supported, and used is really important for that matter. If you say that I have used all different kinds of databases, well, you are trapping yourself, because then they might ask you different use cases of them. So first, let us understand what are the different kind of databases and then see how to tackle this question in the interview. First, we have a database type for key value pair, and the best example is Redis. And in Kubernetes, we know etc, right? which is also the Kubernetes database, internal key value pair database that will be present on our control plane. This is also a key value pair databases. Then we have column-oriented databases. The example shown here is Cassandra. And these are basically completely column-oriented databases, meaning if this is a table, you might be wondering always like data to be like this. No, in this case, it is more focused towards the column orientation, and it is super effective to store different kinds of information and very fast retrieval capacity. It has very fast retrieval capacity. Next comes the NoSQL or document database. And this is also called as schemaless database. The data stored here usually looks like a JSON format data, but it is more or less a data that doesn't have any particular schema. The most famous one is MongoDB, and the one that in AWS is DynamoDB, right? DynamoDB is the one that you might have come across the AWS infrastructure. And the relational database, also known as SQL database, right? The commonly used database is you can use MySQL, Aurora, Postgres, Oracle, etc. Okay, now we have understood different kinds of databases. Which one should I explain? If you have already worked in IT, you have already come across these databases, then this answer is pretty easy. You pick one of which you are confident and can explain what this database does. Now, if you have come across only MongoDB, then say I have worked with MongoDB, right? And the counter question might come regarding MongoDB, so be prepared. If you are trying to be a part of the IT company or trying to become a DevOps engineer, in that case, my suggestion is you say you have worked with relational databases. And you can say, in my team, we are using relational databases and we have multiple relational databases. They are running on RDS systems, that is RDS in AWS. And you may say we are using MariaDB or AWS Aurora. Why am I saying this? Because it is convenient for you to explain what this RDS is, and it will take you towards the direction of RDS explanation. This is how you can tackle this particular question in the interview. So let me just repeat this again. If this question is asked in the interview, keep it very simple and answer something like this. I have used relational databases in my company because our application requires such kind of relational databases. And we are cloud users and we use AWS Cloud. Hence, in AWS, we are using RDS. In the RDS, we have different kinds of databases and we prefer to use MySQL or MariaDB. This is how you can formulate the answer. Please note, there will be a counter question on this, asking you to explain a bit more about these databases. Hence, you have to be careful when you answer this question. Needless to say, like I explained before, if you already have worked with any of the other databases, feel free to go ahead and tell that you have worked on any kind of other databases that we also discussed. Well, this is how you can answer this particular question in the interview. That is it for this video, my friends. Speak to you in the next video. Why do we have three different kinds of IAM policy types? Managed, customer managed, and inline policy. The question aims to understand that you as a DevOps engineer have actually worked with IAM properly. Just knowing IAM is definitely a first step, but Having a hands-on experience in IAM is also really important. If you have created an IAM policy as part of your learning or as part of your current role, it is really good and you can tackle this question in the interview. Let us see how to answer this question in the interview. But before that, let us try to understand what are these different kinds of policies in AWS. Managed policy in AWS is basically the one that has been created by AWS and is completely managed by AWS. You might be wondering why AWS needs this. Well, if you tend to launch a Lambda or let's say a Kinesis that wants to write the data to S3, etc., there are some default permissions that it requires to take these actions. And when you spin up these resources, it will actually ask you for a name for this IAM role, and it will create the IAM role on your behalf, or will use this IAM role on your behalf. These are called as managed IAM policy. They are created by AWS and are maintained by AWS. If you as a customer of AWS wants to create custom IAM policy, then these are called as customer managed IAM policy. These are some things that you might create and manage using Terraform. So this is a common way in which companies would create policies also for their use cases. Well then, what is an inline policy? A policy that is created and attached directly to the IAM user, group, or role is known as IAM policy. But what is the clear difference here? I will explain that in a minute, but now kindly observe the screenshot that you are seeing in the bottom. Here I have shown you all three different kinds of policy. This is AWS managed policy, and then we have a managed policy, meaning policy 01 was created by me. And then we have an inline policy, and you can see an inline policy option here. Also, you can see an inline policy button here in the IAM section, the role creation section. So what exactly is this inline policy? This is definitely also an IAM policy, but the difference is this inline policy gets created for this particular role or user. And if you destroy this IAM user or IAM group or IAM role, the inline policy also gets deleted. That is the major difference between inline policy and customer managed policy. There are many use cases for inline policy also, because let us say if you want to give a temporary access to a particular IAM role when you're testing something, you don't want to alter this existing policy, then you can quickly create an inline policy to test these changes and later on apply these changes to the managed policy. So these are different kinds of policies, and you can answer this question in the interview something like this. In AWS, managed policy is basically the ones that are created by AWS and are completely managed by AWS. And customer managed policies are something that we create for our use cases. Customer managed IAM policies are custom IAM policies that are used for our applications, etc. The inline policy has a very special use case, meaning it gets created as part of the IAM user, group, or role. And when this group, the role, or the user gets deleted, the policy also gets deleted. That is, the inline policy also gets deleted. One other point I would like to add here is, if I create a customer managed policy, I can attach this customer managed policy to multiple different users or groups, wherein inline policy is restricted to this particular IAM user, group, or role where it got created. This is how you can answer this particular question in the interview if it is asked. Well, that is it for this particular video. Let us see what kind of questions will appear in the next video. Thank you. Let us see what kind of questions will appear in this video and how to tackle them if it is asked in the interview. This question is coming from the domain AWS, and the question is, what is ingress and egress? What are these terms mostly associated with? So if you have been working with AWS or you have learned AWS as part of becoming a DevOps engineer, I am pretty much sure you have already come across these terms. So you can pause this video here and see how would you answer this particular question in the interview. Let me go ahead and explain a few terminologies to begin with, and then we will see how to tackle this question. Ingress is basically incoming traffic. Egress is basically outgoing traffic. That is all this is about. So in terms of how they express it is basically ingress and egress. Now, the moment I have explained what is incoming traffic and outgoing traffic, are also known as outbound traffic, you are pretty much sure where it is associated with. It is mostly associated with security groups. I have a small example here where I have explained this pretty clearly. In the security group, we have outbound and inbound traffic. I'm pretty much sure you guys have enabled SSH port 22, 0.0.0, something like this, right? So what is this? This is basically allowing the incoming traffic for port 22 throughout the world. Well, this is not a good idea if you are doing this in production. You have to usually lock this with your VPC IP range. Okay, now that we are aware of what are these terms, how would you answer this particular question in the interview? Egress stands for incoming traffic and egress stands for outgoing traffic. And these both terminologies are closely associated with security groups. And we also call them as outbound and inbound traffic. On a side note, I would also like to add that these are also associated with our VPCs and subnets, where we control our incoming traffic from the internet and routing the traffic between our subnets. This is how you can tackle this particular question in the interview. Well, that is it for this video. Let us go to the next part or next section and see what and all new topics we get to learn as a part of DevOps interview preparation. Thank you. Auto-scaling group for a project is having issues with getting or provisioning new nodes. It's using complete spot instances. What could be the issue? Just to give an explanation around the question, we are having an auto-scaling group, and all the servers in this auto-scaling group is having only spot instances. And for some reason, they are not able to provision new spot instances from the auto-scaling group. What could be the issue? Now, as a DevOps and as a AWS engineer, you should be able to already guess where the issue is. So let's go ahead and see what could be the possible issues here. Having an ASG, that is auto-scaling group, only of spot instances is definitely not a good idea unless and until the application that you are building can support a downtime or have a backup auto-scaling group. Why is it? Because spot instances can be taken away from you if there is a change in the bit price. That's the fundamental of spot instances. Hence, if you intend to spin up an auto-scaling group only of spot instances, there might arrive a time when the bit price is so high and they can take away your spot machines. If you are wondering that, what if I bid too high? Bidding is just a process to acquire a spot instance, It is not a guarantee to get a spot instance. So you might be bidding a bit too high, which is fair, but that doesn't guarantee that you will get a spot instance. I believe you understood what I am trying to convey you. So what are the two major causes? Well, the first one is spot price, and the second one could be EC2 quota limit. What is a quota limit? In AWS, you can definitely launch as many machines as possible, but there is a soft limit set on each and every account. This is to make sure that AWS can track, and also it's easy for you in case somebody hacks your account and just spins up thousands of machines. So there might be an issue with the quota also. Well, in the below diagram, I have shown you the spot instances prices for a machine are 4x large. And let us take an example that all your auto scaling group is having only R4x large. In that case, if you are in the availability zone green, your bid price is less, you might lose all the machines, right? So that could be one issue. And the second issue is the quota limit. How to handle the quota limit issue? Well, all you have to do in terms of quota limit is go to AWS support, open a ticket to increase the quota limit, and that will be done immediately, and you should not have any further issues. Okay, so how do we handle this particular question in the interview? Based on the given information provided, I believe that the spot prices might have increased than our bidding value, and hence the auto scaling group might be having certain issues to provision the new machines. There might also be another edge case, that is the EC2 quota limit, meaning every account has a particular limit. It's a soft limit, and we might be hitting the soft limit. If that is the case, we would go to AWS support and request them to increase the EC2 quota limit. Well, that is how you can tackle this particular question in the interview. That is it for this video, my friends. Speak to you in the next video. Thank you. How is your K8 setup done on AWS? Please explain. This can be considered as an entry question in the interview, meaning just as a warm-up question, they're trying to ask you that, how is your K8 setups done? If you say that the setups are done directly on EC2 machine, also it is fine, or in a different way, then also it is fine. But here they are trying to get some information from you based on which the further questions might appear in the interview. Let us see how to tackle this particular question in the interview and what are the details around this. We have many ways in which we can provision K8 setup. Locally, we can use Minikube, and in cloud, we can use AWS EKS, we can use EC2 and KOps, we can use kubeadmin and a bunch of EC2 machines to provision the K8 cluster, that is Kubernetes cluster. If you are using GCP, you can say we are using GCP cloud. GCP cloud, if you are mentioning that in the interview, you can say you're using K8 from GCP, which is also fine. But the fact that they're asking you this question is to understand that what kind of Kubernetes cluster are you using in your production services? Because when it comes to production, the stability of your environment is super important. And hence, the option of using KOps or the option of using kubeadmin is not possible, because these will not give you a direct stability. You can provision it, but then it also has a very high overhead of maintenance of this particular services. So what would be the quickest answer to this and the easiest answer to this? You can mention that for production services, we are using EKS. And for development services, we are using kops cluster. Okay. And I've given one small example here. You can say that all our code deployment is happening using the Helm code. And the first setup that people can use and test is kops, where a quick setup is done to test. And if you are working on a quick Kubernetes setup and you want to test something, you can use kops and set it up. But when it comes to production services, we are implementing managed EKS cluster in AWS, which offers a lot more flexibility for us in terms of maintenance, scalability, etc. If you are coming from GCP cloud, or if you are coming from Azure cloud background, don't worry, you can answer this question in a similar format. Okay, so how do we handle this particular question in the interview then? How do we answer it? In our current setup, we are using AWS managed EKS cluster as part of production setup. If there is a need to have a staging setup done, we leverage kops to do the same, and using which we are setting up our staging testing setup. The reason why we are choosing managed EKS cluster is it already gives us a lot of flexibility in terms of compatibility with other AWS components and less maintainability from our end, meaning we don't have to spend a lot of time maintaining this Kubernetes cluster itself. This is how you can handle this particular question in the interview. Well, that is it for this particular video. Speak to you in the next video. Thank you. What are the load balancers in AWS? Briefly explain which one you have used and the use cases of the others. Typically, any organization that relies on AWS would have used load balancers for sure. And you, being a DevOps engineer, will be aware of this, and that is what is getting expected in this particular question. Again, like I said to you, if this question is asked in any different cloud, then feel free to alter this answer accordingly. This course is designed with AWS Cloud in mind. Hence, we will be focusing on load balancers in AWS. You can pause this video here to see how you would answer this question if it were to be asked in the interview. Very well then, let us try to tackle this question and see a bit details about what are the different kinds of load balancers that we have. The first kind of load balancer is basically the classic load balancer. And the classic load balancer uses a logic called as round-robin traffic routing. Round-robin traffic routing is a very famous way of sending traffic between multiple EC2 instances. But we don't need to discuss a lot about this. The reason is it is planned for deprecation by August 2022. Hence, if you are using classic load balancer by any chance, you should know that you should move away from classic load balancer already. So let us forget this classic load balancer for this particular question and focus on the next one, that is application load balancer. Application load balancer is the path-based load balancing. So it is designed to send traffic based on path. What do I mean? If you have path home, and if you have a path, let us say mobile, then this particular traffic will be going to an ASG where the home page code is installed. And this particular traffic will be sent to an ASG where mobile website code is set up. So this is the mobile web page, and the above was the home web page, home code web page. This kind of routing based on the incoming path can only be done, or application load balancer is one of the things that can do this very beautifully. Hence, this is the use case of application load balancer. The next one is network load balancer. And in the network load balancer, one thing we have to understand is it will be used in most cases where it involves streaming services, or anything to do with packet related transmission. The reason network load balancer is faster is because it directly interacts with a network layer in our TCP protocol. There are 7 layers of TCP protocol, and out of these 7 layers, network load balancer directly interacts with the network layer, which is the 4th layer. This makes this load balancer very, very fast in terms of implementation, in terms of how it works, but it is suitable in most cases where we use streaming services, interactive websites which has videos, or wherever we have packet related transmissions happening. There is a new load balancer that has been introduced very recently, and this is known as gateway load balancer. Now, if you have not come across this in your training, it is better to revisit this topic. I will do my best to explain this in this video. Now, gateway load balancer uses a protocol called as GNV protocol, and it uses a port called as 6081. This is mostly locked. You cannot change it. And it runs within one availability zone. This is also very specific in explanation. The reason is this is used for a certain kind of integrations where you need a gateway server. Now, what is a gateway server? I have explained this in multiple scenarios in the previous interview questions. So you can go back and watch that video again if you're not aware of this term. Now, if you have gateway servers and need to do balancing around this, then these particular load balancers will play a very, very important role. Now, how do we tackle this particular question if it is asked in the interview? First of all, be aware that if you are coming to this particular video only based on your training knowledge, then be careful how you tackle this question, because there can be counter questions also from this. And if you already worked with AWS, then I believe you already know how to tackle this question. But let me share a way in which you can balance this out. In my organization, we currently use application load balancer only in most cases. The reason is we support a simple website that has XYZ functionalities. Hence, the suitable load balancer for us is application load balancer. Hence, we are sticking with application load balancer from a very long time, and it serves our purpose. With application load balancer, there are other load balancers in AWS, and I can give some information about them. We have classic load balancer, network load balancer, and gateway load balancer. What I am also aware is classic load balancer is supposed to be deprecated very soon. Hence, there is no point in using them. Neither would I suggest them to be used in any existing project. Network load balancer also have a very specific role, and they use different protocols for communication. We have not come across a use case for them yet, at least in the current project that I am working with. Gateway load balancer, as the name suggests, is a use case for a specific purpose when it comes to balancing the gateway traffic. And we are not using this service also at this point of time. This is how you can balance this particular answer so that it doesn't seem too extreme in case of your answer. Now, please note, don't ever say that we are using all 4 load balancer or all 3 load balancer. It might be a case that you might be. If you are, then please go ahead and do it. But this particular suggestion is for only people who have not worked with AWS directly. Please don't tell all the load balancer, because then you might be asked a lot of counter questions or follow-up questions, in which case it might be difficult to answer it. Very well. That is it for this video, my friends. Hope you have understood what I have explained, and speak to you in the next video.
What is a marketplace AMI? What does AMI stand for? I'm pretty much sure all of you are aware of it, right? It stands for Amazon Machine Image. So what is a marketplace AMI? So here they are trying to understand if you have understood the concepts of EC2 and also explored a bit about EC2, not just spinning up the EC2 instance, not just that, but also understood about AMIs. Let us see what the details around this. AWS Marketplace is a curated digital catalog that makes it easy for organizations to discover, procure, entitle, provision, and govern third-party software. That is a definition, and I have given some example. But why does it exist? I will try to explain. So we will take an example of this Red Hat server itself. Okay. Now Red Hat is an operating system. We are aware of it. It's a company, it's a very big company. Now they want to make sure that their consumers who are using AWS also can spin up EC2 instances with Red Hat. Now, how can they earn money? Earn money when you are using AWS. So what they are going to do is Red Hat will create its AMI and put it in the marketplace. If you want to use this Red Hat machine, you can buy this. In this place, there are costing will be done like this. There will be cost of EC2 instance plus cost of the AMI. So cost of EC2 instance will go to whom? It will go to AWS. Cost of AMI will go to Red Hat. This is how external companies can also earn money for their applications by giving this application to marketplace, putting them in marketplace where you can subscribe for it, and whenever the EC2 instance starts running, you will be billed accordingly. Now there are different kinds of pricing model also available here. The one I have explained is a very simple one. So how is the cost divided? There is a cost per EC2 instance, and EC2 instance cost will go to AWS. And when you spin up this AMI on that EC2 instance, there will be a small amount for the AMI itself, which will go to the respective organization who created that AMI. Now, if you go to the AWS console and try to look for it, you are going to find more details around this. And if you are not aware of this concept, then I would request you to try this out and see what kind of AMI products are available. So how do you explain this in the interview? Very simple. This is how you can explain this particular answer in the interview. AWS Marketplace is a place where I can find external softwares or operating systems that I can use without needing to sign a specific contract with that organization. Whenever I use this software on my EC2 instances, I have to pay two kinds of fees. One being for the EC2 instance itself, and the second for the software utilization. This is helpful for us in many cases wherein we want to test out particular software or operating system quickly, see if it works for us, and test out the features around it. AWS Marketplace AMI is a great place to look for a lot of variety of softwares and operating systems which we can utilize for our projects. This is how you can answer this particular question in the interview. I hope you understood a few concepts in this video, and also very importantly, how to answer them in the interview. That's it for this video, my friends. Speak to you in the next video.
What is a lag in read replica of a database? What is a lag in the read replica of the database? I will first explain what is a read replica. You might be aware of this information already, but let me explain it. We have a main database, but this database cannot perform all read and write operation. It has a higher preference to write because it's a main database. What about the read operation then? That is why read replica databases are created, which are very specifically used for write operation. So this is called as RR, read replica databases. In the question, they are trying to ask you what is a lag in a database. Let us try to understand this concept now. A read replica is, as the name suggests, or the applications can only read from the DB. So we will take a situation now, or a scenario. Let us say that there is an application, app 1. It tries to write some records. And the ID of this record is 189. the ID of this record is 189. This is successfully returned to the main database. I hope you're able to follow. Now, the same app1 wants to read this data. Now, either it can read this data from this main database or it can read from the read replica. It will prefer to read from the read replica because read replica specializes in all the connections that requires a read operation. That is why it would use the read replica. With this information that we have now, if the application one goes and tries to read the same record, that is ID 189, this should be present. Am I right? Yes. We assume that this information is present, but how did this information come here? This is because the main database and the read replica database will try to be in sync always. They will try to be in sync always. So every milliseconds or every seconds, this read replica tries to pull all the new records. It will try to pull all new records. So when this is happening, we are assuming this to be a synchronized process, which is correct. But at certain given scenarios, this might not be true. If the main database is having a heavy load, then what will happen? The sync will go out of, that is, it becomes out of sync, and the read replica will have no updated information, let us say, no updated info from the main DB. So in this scenario, even though the write is performed for ID 189, this might not exist in read replica, and this itself is called as lag. The lag can be in milliseconds, the lag can be in seconds, the lag can also be in minutes. How do you avoid this? How do you fix this? You have to wait for the main database to recover, and after that, automatically the read replica will recover and the lag will go away. How would you monitor this? In the AWS RDS console, there is a specialized board for lag monitoring in the RDS where you can see this information. I hope you understood the concept of lag. How would you answer this question in the interview? This is how you would answer this question in the interview. The lag that we are referring to in the read replica can appear if the read replica will not be having the latest information that has been written to the main database. This can occur if the main database is having a very high load, that is, it is performing a lot of actions and is not able to do some other operations. Usually in this scenario, the read replica might not get all the latest information, resulting in the lag. The lags can be in milliseconds or seconds, and usually we can monitor this lag from AWS console for the databases. If you go to our databases and monitoring section, we will be able to see this particular information. This is what is lag. How can we avoid the lags? Usually, the moment we get the lags, we can set up some alerts if we want, or nowadays the databases, if you're using Aurora and stuff like this, they automatically know how to take care of this, so we don't have to worry much about this. This is how you can present this particular answer in the interview. I hope the concepts were also clear. That is it for this video, and speak to you in the next video. Let us see what kind of questions will appear in this video. Understand the motivation behind this question in the point of view from the interviewer. Then understand the concept and later present the answer on how you would present it in the interview. Okay. So this question is coming from the domain AWS, and the question is, are you aware of Backtrack option in AWS Aurora? And how does it help? This question is checking your knowledge on, first, have you worked on AWS Aurora? Second, are you aware of some niche properties in Aurora that can make this database very powerful. If you have not come across this particular property, then it is totally fine. I will explain that to you now in a few minutes. But if you have come across this property, then you should be more confident when you answer it. So what exactly is a backtrack option in AWS Aurora? Let's try to understand this now. Backtrack rewinds the DB cluster to a time you specify. An obvious question that will come to a lot of my students will be, is backtrack similar? Is backtrack similar or same like DB backup? DB backup. Now, DB backup also performs the same action. So is backtracking a new name for DB backup? This is a common question that can appear in your mind. I will answer this now. Let us take an example. In the Aurora database, we have some tables. These tables have some records. We call them records, right? Now, in this particular record, let us take an example that someone ran a delete command. And it deleted around 700 records. These 700 records are new user entries. This action was performed around 7:50 a.m., whatever time zone, for example, GMT +1. Okay. Now, how would you recover from this? Well, a mistake has been done. That is okay. But how would you recover from this? First option is, you might say, oh, we can take a backup. But remember, backup doesn't run every second. It runs at certain interval. It also runs at certain interval. Like it will run probably 24 hours once. This is one kind of backup. You will not be able to run backup of a database every 30 minutes, okay? Because the database is very huge and backing up the whole database every 30 minutes would make the action of your database administration very difficult. So that is not possible. And here is where backtracking comes into picture. So backtracking is a mini backup system where you can back up your database information for a maximum of 72 hours. This is a maximum backtracking window. You cannot go beyond this. Okay. So if you have committed, let us say if somebody has made this mistake of a delete command, then you can enable the backtracking. Go back in time and select a time when, let us say you select a database backtracking at 7:48 a.m., 2 minutes ago, and then recover from this. This will help you. So backtracking is a smaller step, a compressed way of backup system methodology, which only holds the backups done every 72 hours incrementally. So this will help to perform quick actions and to recover from database mistakes or certain actions in the database pretty quickly. 72 hours is a lot for any kind of mistakes to be identified in a database. Now, clearly it is different from backup. Why? Because here we are not taking a complete backup of our database. Here we are only doing certain time window interval related backup. So it is definitely different. And backup itself, when we say, it means it is done for the whole database. You can go back in time and do this, but the recovering from a backup, a complete backup will take time. So that's the difference between backup and backtracking. And how would you answer this question in the interview? This is how you can answer this question in the interview. Backtracking is a very special feature which is offered by AWS Aurora. From what I remember, it is basically a mini backup of data for a window of 72 hours, if I'm not mistaken, wherein if we have made some mistakes in our databases, or if there is some rollback that needs to be done on this database, we can quickly do this. So this can be achieved using tracking. The difference between backtracking and let's say DB backup is backtracking is limited to 72 hours window, as I mentioned earlier, and the backup is a complete backup of a database. I have not used it personally till now, but this has been enabled in our Aurora DB cluster. This is how you can present your answer. Now remember, if you have used it, you can say I have used it. If you have not used it, then you can also mention I have not used it, because it helps for the interviewer to understand that, okay, you understand the concept, but maybe you have not implemented this practically, which is totally fine. Well, that is about this particular question.